experience with the loss of a loved one, it can happen with the loss of any kind. And there can be surprising side effects due to prolonged, unprocessed grief. And my next guest is committed to helping those going through it and has a new book called Just Beyond Grief. Welcome to the Rick Smiley Morning Show. My good friend from the Refresh Family Church in Birmingham, my friend Bishop Stephen A. Davis, y'all. Come on, make some noise. Hey, man. Good morning, Bishop.
Good morning, Rickey. How are you this morning?
Man, I'm good. I am so happy to have you this morning. I'm sure everybody's going through grief, even if you lost a loved one 2, 10, 15 years ago. Grief is so much more than losing a loved one. What are some of the other things people can, be grieving over and not realizing it?
Well, Rickey, there's so many things that people can be grieving over and not realize it. And what I've discovered is that any type of loss can stimulate grief. So if there's a loss of wages, you don't have to lose your job, but if you lose wages, you can grieve over that. If you do lose a job, you can grieve over that. A child moving out of the home, going off to college, can cause parents to experience grief. Anything that is considered a loss or an adjustment, leaving your home country or your home state, that can cause grief. So many people are dealing with grief, and they don't really realize that grief can be stimulated in any area. It does not have to be just the death of a loved one.
Good morning, wow. Bishop Davis. How you doing today?
I am doing well. How are you?
I'm good. I am good. I had a question. How does grief show up in everyday life, and how has grief impacted you personally?
Well, normally grief shows up in everyday life. It can impact your appetite, so there can be weight gain or weight loss. There can be a lot of sorrow or fatigue, so your energy level fluctuates. So it can show up in those ways in your life. So you have to monitor yourself. If there's a sudden change after a loss in your eating habits, in your energy level, that could be a sign that you're grieving. And for me personally, grief, I use grief to thrive, and I've learned that over the years because it can set you back or it can catapult you forward. So what I've done is I've stimulated my mind. I've done a lot of study on my mind. Now, I'm not just a spiritual person. I'm an intellectual person as well, and I study my mind. I check to see what causes me to retract and what causes me to propel forward. So I take the things that are negative and I put a positive spin on it and say, this is working for my good, and that pushes me forward in spite of what I'm feeling in that particular day.
Wow.
So, yeah, we're speaking with Bishop Stephen A. Davis, from Refresh Family Church in Birmingham. So now some people say that things get better, Bishop, with time. So how long does it take to overcome grief?
Well, that's dependent upon the person. The length of time to overcome grief is dependent upon the person, how that particular person is processing what they've gone through or the losses that have occurred in their lives. So some people, it may take 6 months. Some people, it may take a year. Some people, it may take longer than that. And then it's determined by your surroundings, your support groups. If you have a good support group as a family or a church or just some really good friends, it shortens the period of time that you process through grief. I know this particular family that they're really close-knit. They had a sudden death, but they're processing really well, but they're really close. They communicate constantly, and they do so many things together, and it helps them to process through the grief. So that is determined by the person. It is also determined by the culture that has been created for that person or persons who are going through grief.
Wow. Well, Bishop Davis, this is such great information, both spiritually and practically. You know, sometimes when folks are going through grief, they feel like they don't even want to take the first step because they're not sure that the outcome will be positive. Is there any incentive for overcoming grief, and how can people start to get through the grief they're feeling?
Well, I always believe, and I'm just a positive person. I've gone through a lot, but I'm still on a positive note, and that's very important because I believe there's something greater just beyond the moment of grief. If I can use scripture just for a minute, out of 1 Samuel chapter 1, you find out that Hannah was grieving because she could not have a child. But just beyond her grief was a child who was Samuel, and then she had more children after that. If we move beyond grief, we will multiply in assets. We will multiply in the things that we believe are supposed to come into our lives. So the incentive is there's something greater after that moment of grief.
Wow.
Man, boy, no, don't get me started. Because I think for me, Bishop Davis, it's the insult after the injury. You know what I mean? You dealing with just vile family members and things that happen. You can't grieve because you angry because of what things. This is for me personally, things that happen after the deceased and stuff and stuff that you're fighting, because you're fighting stuff and you can't even grieve. You know, you can't even grieve. And so what I think for me, what I do is just kind of block it out of my mind and just go out and just try to live and have a good time. But it's there, it's deep inside of you like a tumor. It's like a tumor that's growing and you can't deal with it. You don't want to deal with it. You don't want to think about it. And you just kind of just let it be and let it sit. But you're scared to deal with it because you're scared that it might break you down because you got a job to do. You got to go to work. You know, you got to continue to provide for your family. And then you got to continue to be there for me personally to support other people that's also grieving because it's just not about me. And, man, we need to have you come on more and just talk about different stages, because a lot of people, man, grieving, and then they lose the house and they in court, they fighting family members over the ones that done took care of Big Mama and then get kicked out of the house when Big Mama died because somebody from up north got all the sense and education and mistreat other family members that was there for the Bishop. It's so many levels to this thing. It's so many stuff with family members that just make the grieving process way more worse than the loss itself is enough. And then you got to deal with the other stuff, Bishop.
Yeah. Well, we see that a whole lot, and we see it so much because different people respond to grief differently. So some people get angry. So that anger is stimulated by the grief. But what I've come to understand is every single person has a response to grief. And it may be lashing out against the other. It may be trying to dominate the family or monopolize things simply because of grief. But they have their different ways of responding. What I've learned is to, and I'm a pastor, so I think a certain way. I learned to forgive those who respond differently than myself when it comes to grief. And I had to do that because some of the things that I experienced, I couldn't have gone on. Now I'm a help to those that are grieving. They can reach out to me by StephenADavis.org. That'll go to my website. You can go to Refresh Family Church. You can reach us that way. That's refreshfamily.church, and you can reach me that way. All of our content will come up. There is also a link that leads to some grief support groups. It's not grief counseling, it's grief support groups. So any of those ways, I'm on Facebook, I'm on Instagram, YouTube. I have a podcast as well. I am the one, Bishop Stephen A. Davis, so they can reach me that way.
Yeah, Bishop, I might have to come and join you. I'm just scared right now. Now, Bishop, what were you saying about your, where did we leave off? What are you saying about your personal experience?
Yeah, well, my mom had transitioned, and I received a little bit of, not personally, it wasn't directly, but indirectly, some backlash, because I had moved my mom into a home that was better, myself and some of my sisters, and one of my brothers, he had some issues with that, but he was grieving because my mother transitioned. And I understood grief from my side. I had knowledge about things. I studied. I'd been in courses. But he didn't have any of that. So because he didn't have the proper understanding of how to process grief, there were words that he spoke back then against me. But now he's better because he's processed through some level of grief. I believe over time, those who are not educated when it comes to grief, they will come around. And they may not apologize, but they will warm up to you just a little bit more after that period. period of time. And grief does ease up as time goes by. But when you're educated in it and you're around the right people that have that expertise in the area of grief, it moves you forward a whole lot faster.
All right, Bishop Davis, let everybody know again, everybody that's grieving, going through stuff, how, and everybody, please jump on, when you do your live and you do your podcast, so everybody can watch, so we can all learn from this. Let everybody know. We got 30 seconds.
Okay. Well, you can get on my podcast. I come on Tuesday mornings. Every Tuesday morning is I Am the One segment. That's always encouraging. That's the one I encourage everyone to get on. Just go to Stephen A. Davis. Go to my Facebook page. I'm always there. We post it later on YouTube. But go there, and I promise you, you will receive something very encouraging on that set. That's the I Am the One segment on Tuesday mornings.
Man, I absolutely love you, man. I really mean that.
I love you too.
Man, I love you. I might ride over to you. You at home?
I'm at the church right now. You have liberty. If you want to come by, you can come by.
All right, I'm gonna swing by there when I get off work, man, just to hug you, man. Thank you so much for coming on this show, and it's encouraging because I was really feeling bad today, and you really lifted my spirits, man. Ladies and gentlemen, the one and only Bishop Stephen A. Davis, Refresh Family Church, Birmingham, Alabama. Love you, man.